Hello and welcome to the Soccer Business Podcast. Major League Soccer is celebrating its 30th year of existence, and while on this podcast we spent plenty of time looking at the growth of the game in the lower divisions, we also want to begin to explore more deeply the issues around the biggest pro soccer league in the region. We're going to start off our MLS-focused content with a look at the big picture. How has MLS gone from an idea to a 30-team league with some clubs now valued at over $1 billion? Joining me this week to delve into that history and look into the future is Canadian academic and researcher Norm O'Reilly. Norm is the inaugural Dean of the University of New England's College of Business. He joined them after 2 decades of leadership experience in higher education, including as the Dean of the Graduate School of Business at the University of Maine. Norm has authored or co-authored 15 books and more than 140 publications in the area of marketing analytics, sponsorship, social media, sport finance, and social marketing in sport. His latest book, co-authored with Rick Burton, is called The Rise of Major League Soccer, Building a Global Giant. Norm, thanks very much indeed for joining the Soccer Business Podcast.
Thanks, Simon. I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks for having me.
So yeah, it's a huge topic to cover. 30 years of history of MLS. I think when we talk about MLS, and there's constant debates on social media with people who love it, people who critique it, and so on. One thing that often seems to be missing for me from a lot of the analysis is what came before MLS, the context in which it was created in the 1990s, the rather desolate state of soccer in North America after the collapse of the NASL. What was it like? How bad had things been for soccer? Trying to establish the sport in this region had been a very difficult task, hasn't it?
It's very bad. If you take the grading scale of a professor, you'd say it was an F. So in addition to, there was a number of versions of the NASL. And the numbers off the top of my head aren't coming to me, but there were dozens of leagues that failed. Owners lost billions of dollars. Players didn't get paid in cases. Like a litany of failures. So you just imagine any industry where there's been a whole bunch of failures, and then you come in and try to make it work. And the MLS was the one that finally, and we learned this a lot in the book. They were on the teetering point of failure multiple times in their early years. And we can talk about that as we go forward. We learned a lot of that from these deep interviews we did with people who were there. But they almost joined the Mexican League at one point because they were just losing fortunes, and people had lost fortunes before, even with Pele coming and a whole bunch of global stars like we've seen with Beckham and Messi and others since. It didn't work. And it's just been a very long road. And it was a Wikipedia page you can go to that's got a list of all the failed soccer/football leagues in North America.
Quite a long page.
It's a long list, yeah, and a lot of checks written, and a lot of bankruptcies along the way. So yeah, as bad can be from a business perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a joke that soccer is the sport of the future in North America since 1952 or something like that. But it clearly influenced the structure and the idea of MLS. I mean, I've listened to Ivan Gazidis talk about those early years and how they came up with the idea of how MLS would be organized in order to avoid what happened to the boom and bust of the NASL. How important do you think that understanding, that creating that single entity structure, the controls that they put in place to ensure they didn't get in a repeat situation?
Essential. And as the NASL and other leagues that had failed before them, you might have had 1 or 2 good clubs, right? From a financial perspective. Let's leave off the field, which I'm no expert in, to the side, on the field. But off the field, if you have one club like the New York Cosmos, we're doing great, but everybody else is losing money, then there's jealousy problems, revenue sharing. So when you go in with a single entity, and there were 4, major investors in the original stage of MLS, and they all were willing to take risks. And there's 2 pieces. There was kind of a shared risk, and then across the clubs, there was kind of, if some are failing, we'll move them around, we'll do different things, but we're all willing to lose some money for a while, and we're all willing to create this thing bigger. And then when the time comes when we're there, then we can look at alternative models and structures. And they're not the first league that's done that, as you know. And but I think if no one had done that, we wouldn't be here today, and MLS certainly wouldn't be at the stage it is today.
So those four, they were mainly from NFL backgrounds, right?
Yeah, there's an and Hunt and AEG and yes, a variety of and deep pockets, NFL background, agency backgrounds, had worked, really understood marketing and consumers. And you know this way better than I do. I mean, there's a lot of North American soccer fans. I'm from Canada. I live in the U.S. But most of the time is getting up at 6 a.m. on Saturday to watch, the EPL and other Premier League games. And that's still, it's shifted, but the core fan still prefers the Premier League games. So they knew the interest was starting to build, but how do you convert that into going to games that were more local? So you really had to have marketers at the table too. So investors with money, people that understood big sport business and that structure that we talked about. But I think also essentially, and we learned this in the book and the investigative journalism we did, had to have deep marketing experience. And all the pieces were there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in those early days, when you go on YouTube and look at some of the games from the first season or two, it looks completely different from how MLS looks now. Games taking place mainly in NFL stadiums that were obviously hard to fill for a startup league. But in terms of business, a very tight control over player costs, expenditures, transfer fees almost non-existent, and salaries very restricted. Yeah.
Very restrictive. It's almost a socialist, if you could use that term, environment, right? Like everyone's going to be treated equal. I mean, the WNBA is still there, right? They're starting to grow. It started as a single entity structure, but now the players' salaries are very constrained. That's probably going to start to break soon too. But they're another example of a single entity that started and now looks like it's going to be successful. There's also a number out there like XFL that have failed, UFL. There's a number that didn't work. But MLS, that model's going there. So you have to control it. You have to control your costs. And it's that point we talked about early on. You can't have a star and 9 poorly performing teams. So one owner making money, everybody else losing fortunes, as we talked about earlier. And NASL is a classic example. They're going to fail, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's in contrast to how the game developed in Europe. It's very much a top-down approach, isn't it? And those examples where single entity failed, that must have been something that was, those issues must have been part of the discussion, that there's a danger in single entity that you create something that doesn't feel real, right? That just feels like invented clubs or something, which MLS has managed to get past. But in those early years, I mean, there must have been that fear of that a little bit.
Yeah, that's what we definitely learned about that. And a couple times we got this from the interviews. Some of those initial members almost broke. They wanted to take some money because some of the clubs were doing well, you remember, right? And others were not. And the Mexican league would be more than happy to take them in. There's offers on the table, we learned. So there's a lot of these things at play, which is really quite interesting, but they stuck it out. So I think to your point, they stuck to their guns and said, hey, if this is going to work, we have to create this overall value. So it's single entity value versus club value. So think about a league brand. And the NBA has been very good at this. The European leagues are less good at this. You have these super club brands and then the modest club brands. Staying the course in that model can really, really work. The other key piece to your question, I think it's a cultural difference between European professional sport and North American professional sport, is this notion of competitive balance. And we and lots of people have written about this. So the North American, and this is generalizing, of course, but the North American fan likes the idea that every team each year has a chance to win. Right, so there's all these mechanisms in place. The lowest performing teams get the first overall draft pick, and we have salary caps. There's exceptions like Major League Baseball, but a lot of the leagues have salary caps, so you can't keep your super team. You've seen that many times over, right? You build this great team, then they all leave. Where in Europe, it's quite different, right? Like you have club system, you recruit the best players when they're young. They all want to play for, Manchester United, and away they go. And so that's a big cultural difference as well. So this model also appeases that part of the fan who wants to know, if I'm in Kansas City, I've got a chance to win like I do in football. But in baseball, where it's not a competitive balance market, the chance of them ever winning is very, very low because they're paying 1/5 1/7 of a salary of the Los Angeles Dodgers. So it's an interesting kind of to your question, a cultural difference there.
You've mentioned a couple of times there Mexico being a sort of shadow in there, and the possibility of teams going to Mexico or the Mexican League taking over clubs and so on. What did you learn about that? Because I've never heard about that really.
This was a really, So let me one little back point. This was an amazing experience for me as a business academic to act like you and be a journalist, right?
Right.
I know soccer a bit and the business a bit, but to go back long time ago, we did these deep interviews with amazing people who shared time, like who'd worked with been there through the World Cup, the Beckham era, the start of the league, the failed MLS club in Miami before now this big success. So everyone forgets there was a huge failure there before.
Fusion, yeah.
Really interesting thing. So that came up when we dug into this, what you're talking about, this history and how do you overcome a litany of failed leagues and lost money. And today it wasn't all roses. Like we had serious, this was secondhand, but those big players had serious meetings where they were deciding, are we done? Like, are we out? We're writing big checks every year. And there was an opportunity that was shared with us that they could have partnered and become part of the Mexican Premier League. And so some of the clubs would have joined and they would have created some
Do you know when that was about?
90s.
Yeah.
And so very early, like 3 or 4 years in, before they really kind of got some ground. And they were, even if you have billions of dollars, those people didn't make their billions or hundreds of millions because they wrote checks all the time. So early on, they were hemorrhaging, right? And they were spending money, and and Beckham, all these things were starting to in their mind to come down the road that they did do, and they took a lot of risk, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is amazing.
It's a kind of sliding door moment, really, for MLS, isn't it?
And is it shrewd or is it luck? I mean, that's you could debate. So I think we have the view. These are very brilliant people that knew the sport, knew the business, and as we said earlier, knew the marketing. So if you track, and we did this a bit in the book, and we've got lots of data since, like the number of North Americans who are true soccer fans has gone from 3 or 4% to now about a third, if you look at the most recent data. And most of them are Premier League fans first or World Cup fans first, but there's more and more are showing affinity, number one or number two, to an MLS club. So that has a huge shift, and that leads to merchandising, sponsorship, And so they may have seen those trends and said, hey, it's worth sticking this out. We can write a check for a few more years. Because now, if you own an MLS club, you're basically a billionaire, right? Like it's really come a long way. So.
Yeah, because the cynical take on MLS has always been that, the World Cup came along, FIFA demanded that the US create a league as part of the deal to host the World Cup. So they had to do something. And these NFL guys just wanted somebody to fill up seats in their arenas that were empty during the summer. Yeah. But what you're saying is that these owners, and we've seen from the behavior of the people like the Hunts and the Anschutzes and so on, that their level of commitment to it. But they had a much longer term vision than, hey, this is a handy way to sell some tickets while the NFL season isn't happening. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and Ann Schultz would be one example who knew soccer really well. The Hunts, you could say they moved into it. And I think the stadium one's an interesting one. We wrote a lot about this, and you know this too, but the whole soccer-specific stadium.
Yeah.
There's a few examples like Atlanta and Seattle that have managed to fill the big ones. But in most cases, like Toronto or Montreal or Kansas City, they have these wonderful smaller venues that are awesome. I used to live in Columbus.
Right.
So, we were season ticket holders. I mean, what an amazing place to go with a very modest crowd. But San Jose, great place to go, modest crowd. But you're creating this really wonderful environment. So the soccer-specific stadium was a real change. And to your point, that would shift some of them thinking, I'm going to fill my big NFL venue, which maybe is what the Kraft family's doing in New England, because it sits there empty a lot and they don't mind. But for a true soccer experience, football experience, these really worked as well. So there's a lot of rhetoric in there. And the other thing I would say on your comment about 1994, and we learned this from these experts that we interviewed, was they gave a lot more credence to the growth to the 94 World Cup. And I think, as you said, and we learned that a lot of these risks and efforts were really hedged around the power of this World Cup, and why a lot of people think next year's World Cup is going to vault to another level. Now, whether that happens or not is, eye of the beholder, but more than Messi, more than Beckham, more than soccer-specific stadiums. If you ask Pete, we ask them, what's the number one thing? They all go back to the World Cup '94.
Absolutely. I mean, whenever we talk to people in and around the soccer business, I often say to people, are we going to get the World Cup boom that everyone's talking about? And the answer I increasingly get is we're already getting it. You know, in terms of the sponsorship interest and the partnerships, and so many people are looking to get into the game now. And how is that going to change things after 2026? It's I think can only be a positive in many ways. Positive. But
yeah.
Let's just go back to the 1990s for a little bit. It's a good place to go to, I think.
We were young men then, enjoying life.
Yeah. So the single entity model is established. It's doing okay. It's just about surviving. People are losing money, but the clubs are there. The game's on TV. There's a deal of some sort with Adidas. Things are slowly moving. Garber comes in, Don Garber, in 1999, I think. An NFL guy, NFL background. I think he was there for a decade and a half at the NFL.
And risen to be a pretty high position too. Yes.
Yeah. Worked in the NFL international side of things as well. How big a deal was Don Garber to that? I mean, we can look back at it now, with the 25 years he's been there, but at the time, what kind of impact did he make from the off there?
He's been exceptional, I think, would not be overstating it. And I mean, he's obviously supported our book, so you take that for what it is. But I think if you just took his name out and said the profile, right? And to your point, we want a single entity structure to work. What is the ultimate socialist league sport property in the world? So love or hate the NFL, they are by far the most profitable sport league on the planet relatively. And they have this even though they're independent owners, it's as cohorty collective agreement as you can imagine. The NHL, as you may know, copied it in 2005, lost the season with a strike, and really moved to that model and went from a league with a couple of clubs making money to now everybody mostly is doing very, very well. So that mindset, and back to like we talked before, and the advantage of the single entity model, the NFL was the right mindset. And at the time, the NHL was like the Premier Leagues, Major League Baseball. The NBA was not where it is today. And so that was really the shining model. So they want someone from his background with that perspective. And then you come into the single entity model so some of the nice things are, you get equal television coverage across the clubs. You start to build the brands of all the clubs in the league, not just one or two, like the Cosmos example we talked about from the decades before, which kind of failed. So you start getting that kind of approach. You have these revenue sharing models. We're talking as owners having league minimums, league maximums and spend. So the players buy into it. Because sure, the top players aren't going to do as well, but the bottom players do much, much better. So I mean, if you take the other leagues in North America, LeBron James, great example, on the open market would make way more money salary than he does, but he gets less because of the caps. But the bottom players come up. So it's that kind of approach, and he had that mentality, which probably led to the efficiency and the interest. And then if you think about that real wave, and we wrote about this too, that real first wave of expansion that really started to drive the league, like when Toronto came in and that led to other, Canadian clubs coming. We wrote a chapter about that success story. It was $10 million. Like, we almost laugh about that today, right? It was $10 million for a club that's now, pushing $1 billion in value. And so the value proposition to enter, and the same thing happened in Houston and the repeating club in San Jose, et cetera. You could come in at a very modest amount to a very shared structure. So the value proposition for other investors to come in and start to grow that, and then start to move to this model of it's quasi-independent ownership. The table was set. He's the right type of person, the right background, the right history, and then to your point, the right credibility coming from the league that's shown that profitability is something a pro sport league could do, and everyone now has followed and the world's gone that way. He was the perfect hire.
Yeah, and he came in 1999. But that was a period really also of some teething troubles for MLS, wasn't it? So we had the contraction of two clubs in 2001, I think, with Tampa Bay Mutiny and Miami Fusion, both basically MLS abandoned Florida, as I would say as a Florida guy. But
Well, you must know the fusion. One second, you must know the fusion story. This was really interesting for me to dig into that failure. So we dug, as you just said,
Yeah,
dug in. I didn't know much about it, dug into it, and they almost followed the same playbook as the Miami success today. Get big star players, da 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 da, and that just shows the overall market shift that at that period of time couldn't make a viable business. 20 years later, you can. Yeah.
yeah. Carlos Valderrama then and Lionel Messi now. Yeah,
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
same stadium. They play at exactly the same stadium as the Fusion, same catchment area of fans, and completely different results from it. Yeah, that does tell a lot, doesn't it? But I mean, Garber has spoken a few times publicly about that contraction era when, and a lot of the media coverage, I'm sure you went and looked at some of that stuff. A lot of that, as soon as they smell contraction, they say this is it. The league's finished. It's already a small league, and now it's getting smaller. This is the beginning of the end for MLS. I mean, but they fought out of that period. Do you think it was a necessary thing for them to go through? Really?
I think so, necessary, and also, and we asked a lot of those questions, and also just to keep the current ownership, interested in going forward. And then to your point, we also know this from work on commissioners, is in addition to the league maybe failing, no commissioner wants contraction. That's
Right.
I mean, we talk about the NHL, that's the same thing. There's contraction in the mid 90s, and Gary Bettman is still the commissioner. Those are the two kind of, on an otherwise great business record. He's got these two, black marks from the contraction of teams. Major League Baseball lost the Montreal team. It just doesn't look good. But I mean, this is just what we heard secondhand. But if you and I had seen the financials at the time, it was a necessary decision. And there was also, and you may know more of the specifics than I do, but behind the scenes, there was a little bit of kind of mergering going on and keeping the different ownership groups happy in Florida. And so there was kind of a contraction, but also keeping the right people happy and keeping it open for a return down the road, which did work out. So yeah, I think it was very strategic. And probably at the time they were worried about failing. That's just after around the time we heard about these potential to join other leagues and maybe contract and remove all the teams. So that was probably on the teetering point. And the World Cup was a bit in the rearview mirror. So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. But they came out of it, and then from sort of 2009 onwards, we start to see 15 teams by 2009, which itself was progress. But since then we've gone from 15 to 30. When do you think things really started to click for MLS in terms of being able to build out? Because that period, AEG and Schultz organization were owning like half the league at one time.
It's still a quasi single entity model. The way we kind of looked at it was, when does the price of entry, and a lot of industries do this, get to a point where it's attractive, right? And so in that the late 00s into the early 2010s, you could still get into the league for, what, not for us average people, but what for an investor of a syndicate would think would be a reasonable amount of money. Once it jumped to the $250 million mark, all of a sudden you're into and now you're into $500 million. So when that kind of hockey stick, took off from like the 1, 2, 5, 11, there was kind of that. And so you're talking early teens when it's like, okay, wait a minute. Now this is a serious investment. So if you're going to get, very few people have that kind of cash available. It's not a plaything of an entrepreneur or who loves the sport. It doesn't mind risking the money. This is now a legitimate thing where you're going to have investors and a syndicate with varieties of groups, political. It's gotten like if you wanted to buy an EPL club, this is not something you just do off the side of your couch with your phone. This is like you have a huge group involved, lots of risk. So to me, that's the real indicator, and it's continued to go up. So you're talking like 2013, 2014 when it really gets to be at that level, somewhere in that point. And then you've got, the Seattle example, the Toronto example, these successes, the Atlanta example, where people go, wow, this has come in and these owners are doing well and they're making money.
Yeah, we've been doing a little bit of number crunching recently with my partner in the business, Paul, going through some of the revenue numbers to look at different clubs and which ones are doing well. And the one that leaps out is Atlanta on so many levels. And it's interesting that with the soccer-specific stadium thing, because I totally agree that that's been absolutely crucial. but they're in an NFL stadium, but it's an NFL stadium they own, right? From
It's another anchor tenant. The other thing that's brilliant, and we wrote a little bit, I would have loved to dug a bit more. We did a bit, not too much, but they've been very creative with their concessions and parking, and a lot have copied them. So they have very extremely low priced beer, hot dogs, food. So their philosophy, I think, is exactly your point, is we've got a great anchor tenant, an NFL club, we're profitable, got this big, beautiful venue that sits empty. We've got a soccer-loving market. Atlanta definitely fits that bill, right? Really, really love the sport, but it's not the same premium pricing point. So let's fill the place. So they've taken a bit of a different approach, right? And as you said, a lot of their fixed costs are covered. Their venue, their place. How do we get people in the door? Very reasonable price tickets. Exciting game to watch. And those venues are great if they're full. The problem with the big venue, as you well know, if you have 17,000 people in a 65,000 seat stadium, it's a bad experience. If you have 17,000 people in a 16,000 seat stadium with people standing room, it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
That old meeting thing, book the room smaller than the number of people that are coming. But so I think they've really brilliantly done that. And we talk about it a little bit, but and others have kind of looked at it, because I know in sport the general philosophy is I'm going to go there, I'm going to spend a fortune on a beer or whatever, and so they've gone completely the opposite way, and so it's a really neat model, and it's worked. It's worked.
Yeah. So we've seen all this growth. You talk quite a lot about the Apple deal. Television. We did a podcast last week with Dave Checkitts, who obviously has a big background in different sports. And he was an owner of Rail Salt Lake for a while. He got out, and he was pretty upfront and said he got out because he was losing too much money at that time. Yeah, I mean, we often forget these things, but and he said that fundamentally for him, the problem with MLS in terms of it becoming even more mainstream than it is now, let's put it that way, is television. That it's just not, television. I think he said something like television has built every successful sports league in this country, and MLS hasn't quite cracked it. But you take an interesting twist on that in the book, because you talk about digital. Radio built baseball, the internal memo that you cite in the book. Radio built baseball, television built football, and digital will build soccer in America. Talk a little bit about that. What does that mean, digital building soccer?
This is a great question. We could have a whole podcast on this, and so we've done a lot of work over the years on regional sport networks, which are in North America were the golden goose for years, and they're now really fading, right? So linear television is dead or dying. Some people will disagree with me on that, but the numbers have continued to go down, and it used to be, as you know, a big cash cow. So if you think about something like an ESPN here in the United States, people were paying $6 a month, 100 million plus households, times 12 months. They're just getting this. And so why are ESPN getting out of all this thing? Well, because their revenue pool has just shrunk. Sure, we're spending a bit more, but the amount of people subscribing, we're now picking the way it should be. But a lot of people that weren't watching sport were paying a lot for sport. Anyway, so linear television is disappearing, and people are now able to choose what they want in a variety of different ways. And so that was the first. That's kind of the general trend. And in a global property like soccer, and there's a few others like that, other sports we could talk about, that's really, really interesting, because people want to watch when they want to watch. And people younger than us, look at my kids and how they consume sport versus me, how I consume sport. Very, very different, right? Completely different. All on their phone, all digital, and they're just as up to date as I was when I was their age, or you might have been, with stats and everything, following, but just in a very different way. And the television for them is a second screen, in some cases a third screen when they're watching. So that's it. There's variations across the board. So we know that's coming, and with younger generations is already here, how they're consuming. You're seeing the rise of gambling. Well, that's very simply because it drives this generation to watch and consume versus other things, right? And it's got its pros and its cons. So, and soccer is a sport that lends itself to really interesting gambling outcomes. Fantasy sports, and so going on and on. I think that's pretty clear, right? There's that trend is coming, and you and I could be on here 5 years from now, and it's going to be a completely different sport media environment than we see today, right? It's really, really shifting, and eventually these opportunities to do AR and VR and stuff are going to become more than fringe, going to become real, whatever they look like. So that's the first piece. Then the Apple deal. And it's interesting, when we started this journey of this book, it was right when it got signed, so 3 years ago or so. And there was a lot of skepticism, and it did not work. You remember, did not work at first. People were very slow to subscribe. Was Apple all in, or were they kind of playing around? Well, holy smokes, you come 3 years later, completely different story, right? And Apple being such a dominant brand, and that's led to all this kind of halo effect of other brands being interested, who want to be associated with it. The subscription numbers have come up. Just wait when the World Cup, all these things are going. So we were hedging our bets that we thought it was really, really positive, and that's where we think it's going. And so it's not as drastic of a shift as like in-person to radio to TV, to use that your point in that quote, but an evolution from linear television to a digital consumption pattern, when you want it, how you want it, in the format you want it. And soccer really, and football really lends itself to those short vignettes of coverage, right? Like amazing goals, amazing plays, that these younger people that when they're not at a venue aren't so keen to sit down and watch 120 minutes of a game, right? They want to watch, or 90 minutes of a game, whatever the sport is.
Yeah.
They want to watch. They love that 9 minute, 6 minute, 7 minute kind of repeat plays. Soccer's brilliant for that. So that's kind of where we're thinking there.
Yeah, I mean, there still is a little bit of skepticism around the Apple deal in terms of, people wondering how many people are actually watching it because the data's not out there, which always, gives feeds a kind of rumors and so on. And
all we got from our interviewees was it's good. We didn't get anything more than that. So yeah, you're right. We're still not sure, right?
Yeah.
Good point.
But what's interesting about it for me is like soccer fans, like I've noticed just on social media, for example, NFL fans who, when it comes to Thanksgiving, we need to get Peacock. And you see these people complaining about having to download an app to watch an NFL game. I'm like, soccer people have been doing that for like years. If we want to watch the Premier League or we want to watch the Champions League, we're streaming. Yeah. So I guess soccer fans are in some ways more literate than the average sports fan for making that shift. Yeah.
I think so. And the North American ones have been doing it for years, right? Like
yeah.
My wife is from France. And so we've subscribed for years to European networks to watch rugby or soccer or whatever. And it's starting to shift. I think those are the older curmudgeons that are maybe saying that. Because I mean, now if you look at a sport fan here, it's like a collection. No one's got cable, right? You've got ESPN, you've got Peacock, you've got, and so all these different platforms to reach different content that you want to reach. And if you don't want it, you turn it on, turn it off. So Peacock has done the same around the Olympics to great success, and they're more public about it. So the Paris Games elevated their subscriptions massively, and some people cancel them, but a large proportion have stuck with them. And they've built their program around, cycling. They do have some soccer. They have other sports. The Olympics are a big part of it, and they've done pretty well. So it's that sticky content we like to talk about, right? And so if MLS it's not there yet. I think we would all agree. There's very, very good content. Maybe Miami games right now are sticky content. Like people want to get them from all over the world. Maybe a few other clubs are in that neighborhood. But if you can get to that sticky content, you can build an entire network around a property like the Yes Network and Fox have done around the New York Yankees, right? It doesn't matter what else is on that network. So many people want to watch the Yankees. They buy that pass. And to your point, I've done it for years. So it's behind, but the soccer fan in North America is more used to it. That number is now growing to about a third of the population. So that's really good. And then the on the other side, the Apples of the world providing this content in a much better packaged, useful, and less expensive than linear cable format, right? Is really an interesting thing. So yeah, we're pretty big on that. That's going to be a good thing. And we'll see what the World Cup does, but we think that's going to be a really good thing for MLS and for soccer/football. Yeah, I should be saying football right on this podcast, but I know we
don't care.
Struggle with this in the book.
Don't
so
care.
much.
I'm happy. I'm comfortable with soccer.
Okay. Good.
It's but it's like it's interesting. If I was talking about this recently with somebody about Apple who was saying that one of the weaknesses of the deal is that when the playoffs come along, you don't get that boost from the casual follower suddenly saying, "Oh, the MLS playoffs are on. I'm going to start watching it," because you basically created your own ecosystem. You're either in it or you aren't, really. So that temporary boosts you don't get the same. But there's pros and cons to it for sure. But I was saying, look, if it didn't exist now, what would MLS be looking at? They'd be looking at a streaming deal somewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the idea of that old-fashioned TV deal's almost gone out of the window now, hasn't it? In 3 years.
It has, and it's really declining. And it's only those very few properties. And even look at the big staples in North America. I mean, the Super Bowl is the one exception because it's just continued to be this big festival. But everything else, the NBA playoffs this year, they started to go down. Now, the measurement of the streaming is still not perfect, as you know, and
Yeah.
so that's what's missed or not accounted for. How many people are watching that aren't paying for it? All those kind of things. But I mean, it's a plus or minus in there. But we're seeing that decline because people are much less interested in 3 hours in front of a television as they get, and so that's a big challenge for us overall in sport, and that's why this repackaging's happening. And yes, I think we're saying the same thing. It's set up to least, maybe it doesn't vault it to the our dream of being the top three sport, but definitely keeps the MLS in the minds of sport consumers, gets it coverage on the major networks and media outlets, and continues to have the owners making lots of money and the billion-dollar clubs which are already there, right? So I think if you could talk to the MLS ownership, those four people that started back 30 years ago, if you could say, here's where we be today, I think they all would said, oh yeah, we're in. Like it's where they want it to be. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Last thing then, really, in terms of like looking towards the future. I mean, there's some fairly bold predictions in the book from people, and Garber, the way he talks about it, has gone from, he used to use phrases like, becoming a league of choice or establishing ourselves globally and so on. Now there's this talk about becoming one of the truly top leagues in the world, being up there with the Premier Leagues and so on. Do you, when you look at the valuations are all going up? I mean, every metric you look at, pretty much revenue, everything else they're smaller than the valuations, but they're also heading upwards. Is that kind of top three in the world, which people who watch the game on the field will immediately go, MLS is a long way from that, yeah? But in terms of a business, it's not. Is it realistic for MLS to get to that in the next 10 years, do you think?
I think so if a few big things happen, right?
Right.
Like there's a couple of things that happen. Like this World Cup has to be what we're all hoping it's going to be, blows it up, and that 30% goes to 50% in North Americans who become soccer fans, which could happen, right? It could easily happen, the vaulting that happened in 94. But the big one, I think, is the game on the field. And you pointed this out, and I'm no expert like you are, but you watch a lot of these games, and it's not the same quality as what some people would say. Maybe there's little elements of it, certain players are there at that level. There's certain games, but
Yeah.
people argue it's still a little bit lower than those. The transfer window, which I know the MLS is working on, like how do you rationalize the schedules, the two cultures we just talked about, the open market and the closed, or the competitive balance or the less competitive balanced markets. How do you rationalize those? And they're working on it, right? They see it. And if you and I are owners, and my understanding from the interviews was the ownership current group are kind of torn. There's some that kind of like it where it is, this North American style, we're good. And
Yeah.
others that want to say, hey, we want to go up there. We want to be the same, we want to be in the same choice set as other Premier League clubs around the world when players are thinking about it when they're 21 or 18, not when they're 32 or 33, that they want to play for us. And so that's a risky thing, right? Because you move things around, you lose some of your hardcore fan base because they wanted this competitive balance market. So they're working through all those. But yeah, they would have to figure that out and take some serious risk to elevate. And maybe 10 years is too soon. It might be 20, but there's certainly the potential would be there because the resources are there. But I think you got to overcome that. The cultural difference and the transfer window are the two big ones. And we learned that from a lot of the people we talked to, like you. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of explains why there's this big discussion going on about switching the calendar around and
Exactly.
switching to the European style calendar.
It seems simple, but it's a complicated thing, right? As you know, it's not an easy thing to do. And there's lots of risk, right? To your local fan and those that buy your season tickets and all those things, right? So,
especially in Toronto and places like that. Yes.
Exactly.
And winter soccer is a different story over there. I remember attending an MLS Cup at that field once. Yeah.
Oh, I think we were probably there. It was 2015.
Yes.
When it was Dallas and Colorado, I think, were playing, right? So
right.
The game was not a great game, but it was a fun event. One little anecdote on Toronto. We wrote a chapter about Toronto in there, and followed it very closely. But to your point earlier, really interesting. Like, and up until there's been a few games I think recently, but for the most part of the early history, they'd sold out every game. Like amazing ticket demand, but the TV audience very, very weak. So this is kind of the challenge around the league, right? As you point out, there's a rabid local loving fan base that go there and make it a great environment. It's one of the funnest games to go to in Toronto versus the other clubs. And you can make the same in other cities, San Jose, et cetera. We go to games, but then the TV audience, very, very modest, right? So like the Canadian Football League would outdraw them by hundreds of thousands of viewers. That gap that's started to come up a little bit, but that is a big challenge. That maybe a number 3 to your question would be around. You really have to get the audience when they leave the game, not watching the Premier Leagues, watching the MLS. I think the hardcore loving fan, they go in person, they follow the team, but a lot of their attention goes to their favorite club in Europe.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that's what they have to cross, isn't it? You go to somewhere like Columbus, in the new stadium they built in Columbus, which is fantastic. It's downtown. Everyone in the bars is talking about the MLS team. It's not even an issue. It feels mainstream. It feels totally relevant. But then during the rest of the country, if you don't have an MLS team, it's been part of that conversation, isn't it, day to day? Why does somebody in Alabama care about the Dallas Cowboys? Because that's what's going on in the country, and MLS just needs to get to that level.
And think how that affinity, if people are willing to get up at 4 a.m. every Saturday for year after year to watch the Premier League games, right? Like, I mean, because they live in California, they're getting up at 2:30 in the morning, or they stay awake the night before, right? It's amazing. So how do you translate that fan, at least in part, to that club? It's really an interesting thing. So, yeah.
Still some challenges, but it has been an amazing journey over 30 years, and it's all there in this book, which we'll put a link to below this video and in the podcast notes. Norm, it's been great. I feel like we've got probably another 100 issues around MLS we could discuss. Maybe we'll do it another time.
I would love to, Simon. It's been a pleasure, and it's been fun, and you're really good at this, so thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.